The views in this podcast are those of the contributors and don't necessarily represent those of CISL, the University of Cambridge or Investec, and should not be taken as advice or a recommendation. Welcome to What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership in partnership with Investec. This series is hosted by Lindsay Hooper and Marc Kahn.
How do we rebuild confidence in the future? Can we harness the power of markets to deliver for climate and nature and to tackle rising inequality? And how do we innovate without exacerbating risk?
This series tackles these big questions. It surfaces new thinking, explores ideas that challenge assumptions. We acknowledge what isn't working and expose credible paths forward for business, governments, and society.
You'll hear from leaders, innovators and critical thinkers who are grappling with the toughest challenges of our time and bringing forward important new thinking and examples of practical action. I'm Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership.
And I'm Marc Kahn, Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Investec.
This is What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future. Find us on CISL's Leadership Hub via the link in the show notes.
We're glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Welcome to today's episode in which we're exploring what it's going to take to accelerate an industrial revolution, one that replaces high carbon, energy and resource intensive systems with cleaner, greener, more efficient alternatives. We know that some technologies, renewable energy, electric vehicles, are scaling faster than many predicted, and momentum's building around an electro-tech revolution, driven in large part by China's massive investment push. But overall decarbonisation and resource efficiency still remain too slow, and we're edging towards dangerous tipping points. To help us understand where we really stand today and unpack what needs to accelerate, where and how, we're joined by two people at the heart of industrial transformation. Faustine Delasalle is CEO of the Mission Possible Partnership and Exec Director of the Industrial Transition Accelerator, and she spent years shaping global strategies to decarbonise heavy industry and transport. And we're also joined by Fergusson, who's SVP of Studies and Development at Anglo-American, and who brings deep insight from a sector, mining, which is essential for providing material inputs to industrial transformation. Mining is also a sector which, of course, itself faces challenges and pressures to innovate, and which is having to take long-term bets as to which materials and technologies the economies of the future are going to require.
So to start, I wonder if Katie and Faustine, if you could give us a little bit of a personal perspective on your journey to get to the positions you're in and how that may have formed some of the perspectives that you have on this topic.
I've worked in sustainability and innovation my whole career since I was a graduate. And I think the thing that's kept me working in it for coming up for 24 years is just that it's never simple. It's never linear. It's complex, it's challenging, continuous problem solving. And then I joined the mining sector and Anglo-American about 14 years ago. And mining obviously has a very difficult legacy, I think, particularly in the social and environmental space. But the people that you get to work with, the fact that the products are so essential for the world to achieve what it needs to achieve through this energy transition, and the opportunity to do it so much better, to innovate and to really scale positive impact is really, really exciting.
So I've always been working in the space of improving lives, worked in politics for several years in France before falling into the energy transition space a decade ago. And I realized that the energy transition touches upon absolutely every dimension of our daily lives. Over time, I specialized even more into industry decarbonization because it's the toughest part of the transition. I dived into what we called at the time hard to abate sectors because it felt like the space that one needed to get into to create that momentum that was missing.
Faustine, depending on where you look, the story seems contradictory. Are we witnessing an accelerating clean industrial revolution or dangerously slow progress towards a looming crisis?
We're not going fast enough, that's for sure. But if you look back at what happened in the last 10 years, we've made such an incredible amount of progress in that period of time. When we started talking about the decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors back in 2017, 2018, very few were the people and the corporate leaders who actually believed in the feasibility of a clean transition. Less than 10 years later, with a pipeline of commercial scale, not demonstration scale, commercial scale clean industrial projects of more than 1,000 globally. That speed of change is quite incredible. And we know from other sectors where we've seen clean technologies being deployed at pace that once you start on an exponential curve, things then move very fast. So we're not yet at the very fast part of that exponential curve for clean industry, but I'm hopeful that we are in the early stages of that transformation.
It's encouraging what you say. I mean, would it be fair to say then that people generally don't recognize how well we have done and what is going on? Do you think we already have the technology we need to support that further activity? And if so, why aren't superior tech and market forces delivering the transition at speed? What still needs to shift?
The technology, I think we have most of what we need. Where we stand in industry, though, is where technology still represents a green premium compared to the grey alternative, which is no more the case in the power sector, for instance. So we're still at that phase where the technology exists, but hasn't scaled enough to see economies of scale, hasn't scaled enough to see learning curves improvements as well. And so we're in that tough spot where we need additional policy interventions to get those technologies to a point of maturity where they will be able to deploy faster and through pure market dynamics. And what we see is that the sectors that moves faster are the sectors where there are policies in place to create a market for those clean technologies and the products that they produce. Sustainable aviation fuels, for instance, stands out as a sector that is progressing relatively fast. And that's because we have SAF mandates in Europe and across several other geographies. And then we also see the importance of governments committing to this agenda and really developing an industrial policy around this agenda. China being clearly the player that is positioning itself as the clean industry leader globally across the sectors in which we're operating.
All right. So with all that in mind, what are the future plausible scenarios that you see potentially playing out?
The scenario we're trying to make happen is a scenario in which we start triggering that pump of exponential growth, going from what is roughly 20 projects being financed every year globally today to 30, 40, 50 over time, so that we can see technology improve, price come down, and especially price come down in hydrogen-based technologies, which represent a big portion of the industry sectors that are currently some of the highest emitting sectors globally. That should lead to an acceleration in the 2030s. So we might still feel like things are really slow for the next few years, but I'm really hopeful that we'll see a real acceleration in the 2030s on the basis of the progress that we're making on the side of 2030. That's the scenario that we're working towards.
And mining companies are having to make bets on what they think the economies of the future will look like and what materials and feedstocks the industries of the future are going to need. What bets is Anglo-American making about what the economies of the future will look like, what industries are going to need from the mining sector?
I would completely agree with what Faustine is seeing will start to happen now as well with the acceleration at scale through the 2030s. And at Anglo, we've been going through quite a strategic transformation over the last 18 months. For those of us who don't know us, large, global, diversified miner. But what we've been pivoting our strategy to over the last 18 months is a simplification to focus on those commodities that we really see will be supplying some of these crucial megatrends through this transition. So decarbonization and electrification, urbanization, and food security. So the three commodities that our portfolio will be focusing on are copper. Copper is very much the metal of the moment, but quite rightly so when you look at the demand projection to electrify the economy. It's more than tripling investment in power grids from 750 billion today to 2.5 trillion by 2050. The transport sector, electric vehicles use 2 to 4 times more copper. And then when you add in renewable energies and electricity sources needing more copper than other supply, and that's before you get to AI data centers, we're going to need to double mined capacity of copper. So that's a very, very strong focus of the portfolio. Then premium iron ore is the second one. And steel is obviously a critical foundation for all infrastructure. So with a higher population in urban centres, so supporting socioeconomic development, but also renewable infrastructure, we will need more steel. However, steel is also currently today responsible for around 8% of global CO2 emissions. So we have to decarbonize the steel industry. We see a lot of green steel technology development, different technologies moving at different paces in different geographies. But a consistent across all of those will be that higher quality raw material supply will be a really important component to reducing energy intensity and emissions. So we are focusing our investments in our iron ore mines in Brazil and South Africa on producing a premium iron ore to be able to support that, as well as working with our customers on decarbonisation MOUs, supporting startups on green steel tech. But we see the biggest role we can play in that is that focus on high quality iron ore. And then the third focus for our portfolio is polyhalite fertilizer. You know, all the studies suggest a world population of 10 billion by 2050. So food security is going to need to be a real focus. We're going to need more yield from existing land. We can't get more land. We need higher yield. But the agricultural sector is currently responsible for a third of global emissions. And of course, there are issues around soil degradation and water pollution as well. So that's a real challenge that is going to take real systemic thinking. And we have a polyhalite mine in North Yorkshire. It is our first sort of real future smart mine. It's all underground, automated, very minimal surface disruption, and it's producing a natural, organic certified, low carbon fertilizer product, which increases yields by 3 to 5% compared to conventional fertilizers, but also is good for soil health and is low carbon as well. So we're very, very focused at the moment in terms of portfolio on supporting what are the products that are going to be needed from mining to support that transition.
You're clearly betting big on transition there. Is the mining sector really innovating fast enough for a carbon and water constrained world? Will we be able to double the output and so on in a disrupted world? How fast is the sector innovating to ensure we're actually able to extract the minerals, the commodities that are going to be needed?
I think if you looked back 10 years, there's been a huge amount of progress in that time. Is it fast enough, given that we are going to need more mining to be able to achieve all of these goals by 2050? But we absolutely can't do that at the expense of the environment or of the communities around mining. So it's more mining, but it's more responsible mining. And that will require innovation, and it will require a very open culture in the industry to really learn from others, fail fast, learn how to deploy at pace. At Anglo-American, I think we would be recognised as having been at the forefront of innovation on sustainability and technology over the last few years with our Future Smart Mining programme. And through that, I think the teams have had a mandate to do some things that have really contributed to step change in some areas. And we've had some real successes, just to name a couple of interesting ones in the renewable energy space in South Africa, because South Africa is a coal-fired grid. We have set up a joint venture with EDF Renewables to develop and supply wind and solar solutions at scale across the region, including low-cost renewable energy for our own operations. In water, we have got several technologies that are really exciting, including one called hydraulic dewatered stacking, which is about dewatering tailings dams, so making them safer, but also more sustainable, and using that water to then pump back into the mine and the processing system into a closed loop. So it really significantly reduces water use in the mines. And then one that I'm personally really, really passionate about, which is at our nickel mine in Brazil. And it's using enhanced rock weathering technology to repurpose our waste from our ferronickel slag into a permanent, very efficient carbon storage solution through transforming it into fertilizers with high magnesium and silica content. And it just so happens that the farmland around that area is very deficient in magnesium. So the yield that farmers who have been involved in the trials are seeing is up to a 30% increase in yield through that. But it's also a very commercial circular model, because we're getting real interest from downstream customers, including in the tech industry, who are looking to purchase high quality carbon removals to buy the carbon credits from that. So it's actually will become sustainable self-funding and actually revenue generating as well. So those are the kinds of things that the mining sector would never have done 10 years ago. That is a completely different type of thinking, and it's quite disruptive. However, we've also done some things and placed some bets which haven't turned out how we expected them to, or we have some fantastic technologies that are stuck in that innovation stage and not getting through to deployment fast enough. So that pace and scale question that Faustine was alluding to at the beginning, that's what we've all got to really work together to crack.
That's such a great range of technologies and innovations on so many fronts. I'm just interested in any insights around what it really takes to scale them.
So we've done a really rigorous review recently of, let's take stock. What have we learned? What has created value that we want to protect and embed? And what do we need to take on board and do better to get that pace and scale? A lot of learnings, as you can imagine. The first one is absolutely that link to business value. So if you start by understanding the business logic for what you're doing, the likelihood of it being resilient and sustainable and moving faster is so much higher. And in some places, we got very excited by the innovation and lost sight of the business value. And we didn't have those feedback loops to keep coming back and test those original assumptions. So that's really, really important. The second thing is around the need to have a more open mindset around partnering and de-risking. So partnering maybe with partners that the sector has not traditionally partnered with to find faster routes to deployment and de-risking some of that early financing. So can we look at more innovative financing models? It's a big step from a very early stage technology to commercial deployment in a large mine. I think that step is a high risk, high capex step in every sector, but in mining, it's particularly acute. So finding new ways to do that. The third one I would say is around recognizing that innovation and implementation are completely different skill sets. We have not had effective handovers every time. We have had a fantastic innovation that the team are really excited about, and then it doesn't get deployed in a way which is understanding the local context, understanding the existing system. Designing it in is obviously into something new is going to be so much easier than integrating into an existing mining and industrial system, understanding the potential unintended consequences of doing that in other parts of the system. And then the people, making sure that there is a team who is taking forward that handover, who really understand that operating context. But also I think we've learned having those really passionate, tenacious champions on the ground who are going to problem solve until this thing is done. You really do need drive and energy to do that. Very little is going to plug in and work first time. So that's critical. And then the fourth one, I think, is around being more proactive on our engagement in the permitting space. With regulators, the regulatory and permitting regime around mining is very detailed. It's very rigorous. It takes a long time to permit mining projects and expansions. Partly that is because of legacy issues and sort of a lack of trust there. But you can end up with a mine that takes 11 and a half years to get permitted and has 500 permits with 5 to 10,000 permitting conditions. Some of those are really, really important. Some of those won't add the same kind of value as some of the new technologies in terms terms of energy and water reduction and so on. So how can we engage and work and partner with governments and regulators where we're operating to have a bit more flexibility around trialing some of the new technologies and demonstrating their benefits and maybe bringing them to fruition a bit faster?
So that's the first myth to get out. In fact, mining is essential for the sustainability vectors that we all dream are going to play out. So the transformation of the mining sector is itself a fundamental transformation to create the sustainable future we all dream of. So it's a very delicate and complex industry. And so hopefully listeners move away from the idea that, well, we just got to stop mining and be more sustainable. I mean, I actually hear people with that rhetoric. It's totally incorrect. So on that score, is it really feasible that we will be able to access, mine and process the metals and minerals that we need as feedstocks for the upgrading of our energy systems and industries? Is it remotely practical in logistical terms, never mind geopolitical tensions?
That's a big question, but where I would start my answer from is coming back to this question that we need mining in the system, and we actually need more mining in the future than we need today. I just want to caveat that with an element around extraction. If you look at extraction rather than just mining, we will mine more, but we will extract way less than we are today, because the volumes we're talking about in terms of mining of minerals are just dwarfed by the volumes of oil, gas, and coal that we're currently extracting from the ground. So I think it's also important when we speak about mining to put the mining element into this broader context, because we will mine more, but we'll extract way less than we're currently extracting. And obviously the impact of that, both direct impact of the extraction and indirect impact of the extraction, will be extremely lower than what it is today. The other thing that I would then highlight is that supply chains obviously take time to scale. And what's really critical for them to scale is visibility on the long-term trajectory, so that you have investable plans for companies in each of those supply chains. And that predictability comes from government commitment. And if policy frameworks keep evolving and changing with every political cycle, companies will lack the level of visibility and the level of certainty on market developments that they need to be able to invest. And that's particularly true in the sectors where the technology is not yet mature enough that the pump is just triggered automatically through private investment. Some of the sectors that were just mentioned, for instance, the copper market, is, I think, probably one where an Anglo-American will feel very confident moving forward, because all of the market signals are green lights from an electrification, electric vehicles perspectives, etc. The iron ore market is a very interesting one, because the signals in terms of use of new technologies to produce steel are not yet fully green. We have increasing number of commercial scale clean steel projects in the pipeline, none of them really operating yet, a few that are struggling to get to final investment decision. And where the biggest projects that are moving forward are right now is in China, which has reached final investment decision on 2 commercial scale hydrogen steel production projects in the past few months. And the reason we're still seeing that lack of certainty and lack of momentum in the space is because you have to go and think about the whole value chain. And steel manufacturers won't switch to cleaner production techniques if there's no demand for cleaner steel from sectors like automotive or construction. You mentioned partnerships before. You have to find partnerships all the way to consumer level companies that are the ultimate purchasers of cleaner commodities to really create the market signal that will then drive investment at the steel level, but then knock-on effect at the mining level as well. So that collaboration across the value chain and the supply chains is, I think, really critical for us to move forward in this space.
It's a fantastic point around the more mining, less extraction. And I think the other thing to add to that is that a lot of the innovation is focused on precision mining, right? So through robotics, through hyperspectral laser sensing, through use of data analytics, it's actually getting much more precise about extracting those critical metals and minerals. And that will dramatically reduce the amount of waste produced as well.
Are there practical examples of specific collaborations, specific partnerships? You talked at the outset about how do we unlock or drive or trigger that pump of acceleration. What works?
Given that we're talking about steel, let me maybe take two of the flagship examples in the steel sector, right? Hybrid is, as an organization, a combination, a joint venture between a steel manufacturer, an iron ore producer, and a clean energy provider. And that's a very good example of different skill sets coming together to jointly develop a technology which is a hydrogen-based steel-making technology that requires a combination of skills to come to fruition. The other example coming from the Nordics in the same space is Stegra, and where they've gone is actually bringing as well the demand players, the consumers, as shareholders within the company. And that's really has been a critical part of their business model, because those shareholders who are also their clients are bringing a level of stability to their offtake that makes project financing much easier. Those are two really interesting examples of partnerships. But I would also say that what we're seeing in other sectors, like, for instance, the chemical space, is a tendency towards greater vertical integration as well. That's particularly true of some of the Chinese players that started by being wind turbine manufacturers or solar manufacturers, and that are progressively adding to their value chain internally, becoming electricity producers and then hydrogen producers and electrolyzer producers, all the way to ammonia production, methanol production. And what we've heard from those Chinese players in particular is that this vertical integration enables them to cut cost and to have much smoother collaboration between all of the different dimensions of the supply chain. And that leads to a competitive advantage. So it's quite interesting to see those different models play out, one of partnerships and joint ventures and one of vertical integration.
Right now, green steel and some of the bets being made in Europe are in the headlines there and real challenges there. And that will be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I'm hearing you have a level of optimism about that.
Yeah, and the recent developments around Stegra are quite symbolic of what I was saying earlier. One of the issues that they faced is reversal of commitment of public support. So again, the stability of the public and the policy frameworks is really important for those companies to be able to move forward.
You also talked earlier, Katie, about permitting. So clearly this public-private collaboration and confidence in a direction of travel and being willing to support bold innovations is important. But a really important piece there from the public policy side, of course, is the impact on communities and on jobs and local economies. Where are you seeing real, thoughtful, long-term, effective engagement there, whether it might be at country level or at company level, navigating the social impacts of transition, navigating the impacts on jobs and communities? Where is that actually being handled well?
The social element of the transition is just so fundamentally important. Otherwise, it'd be sustainable. And it's challenging. I think I would actually go back to an example that Marc alluded to earlier, and it's one that I know well, which is South Africa. And I think we see South Africa as being a country which is being really proactive on the just transition element of the energy transition. They've set a very ambitious timeline on the transition away from coal. But right from the beginning, they've been very clear that it has to be just. They've attracted a lot of donor funding to support them with that transition. But the first question was, well, what does just mean within this context? Because it's going to mean something different within each context. So they have put a lot of energy into convening a multi-sector forum and working groups to define together what does just look like, what is the policy framework around that? What's the taxonomy so that we all have a shared understanding of what we're working towards? They've put in place a task force within the President's office, really, really laser focused on this. And one of the things that they've done that we've been quite involved with is they've set up a just transition funding platform, which matches donor funding to, for example, social enterprises and NGOs who are very focused on just transition outcomes. So that it's a very rigorous process to get onto that register. But of course, that means that the ability to then attract funding to scale those outcomes is very, very positive. And then I think companies play a really important role in that, not least because we have seen some of the government donor funding drop off recently. So USAID was very involved in that process. The UK government development funding very involved. But while that has dropped off, the private sector and civil society in South Africa have really stepped up to make sure that the momentum is maintained. And one of the platforms that we have around this in South Africa is something called the Impact Finance Network. It was very much designed to be a shift away from a philanthropy CSR approach to social issues and economic diversification and put in place a really sustainable model. And so the platform matches SMEs that have proved their potential in terms of ability to scale and have a real social impact element to their business model. We then match them with social investors who are interested in funding. So the large foundations or some of the social investors. And they have so far brought in 60 million of matched funding for those social entrepreneurs in South Africa. And the model is fantastic from an Anglo-American perspective. It's very aligned to the objectives of what we want to see in the country in terms of that enabling environment for the transition. But for every $1 we put in, it's attracted more than $20 in matched funding. So it's not a philanthropic model. It's one that's very self-sustaining, and we can keep piloting and innovating with it as well. So at the moment, we're piloting a catalytic capital facility to be able to de-risk investing in those types of entrepreneurs and social impact enterprises for other partners. So if we can put in some low interest loan capital to fund a certain percentage, that attracts other partners in and de-risks that for them. And we can really support that scaling across multiple livelihoods. So I think it's a good example of a public framework that's really focused on just transition and the type of role that the private sector can play within that.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, South Africa's certainly got a lot of work to do to make that real. But I think you've beautifully outlined that partnership between government and the commercial enterprises that are participating in these activities is essential to make that happen. And I ask this to both of you. If you could magically make one policy or corporate strategy shift which would accelerate the industrial decarbonization that we all long for, what would it be and why?
And opt for a type of intervention rather than one specific intervention, which is mandates on demand sectors. Because that's what we see works to then create market stability, market certainty, and then enable projects on the supply side to be bankable and investable, and then trigger the scale up of the whole rest of the supply chain. And we've seen that work in sustainable aviation fuels. We've seen the hope of an IMO regulation in the maritime sector drive investments in ammonia and methanol that might be a bit wobbly in the next months, given that those IMO regulations have been postponed by a year, but it's been a real driver of investment momentum. And we're clearly seeing that the lack of such policies in the materials sector, in sectors like automotive or construction, is really slowing down progress in sectors like steel or cement. So that's really where I would start the puzzle, because I think there are many other issues like energy infrastructure, port infrastructure, standards, etc., that will be sped up if that demand pool exists.
I could not agree more with that. I think that the role of the demand side is incredibly important. That's what's been affected recently, and it has felt a bit stop and start and slowed down progress in some areas. So that stability of market signal is incredibly important. So anything that supports the commercial viability of investing in innovations that disrupt existing business models will be the key to getting to that tipping point that Faustine was talking about at the beginning.
You've shared kind of practical advice and lessons learned, but I'm interested in leadership perspectives. What leadership insights would you share with others who may be kind of lacking some confidence that, is momentum really happening? Is this going to happen? Have things faltered? What leadership insights would you leave with listeners?
I think we need to develop and recognize leaders who are comfortable with navigating through complexity and uncertainty. In the corporate sector in particular, our lives are very much governed by dashboards and quarterly reviews and metrics, and you need those. It would be chaos in a large matrix organization without them, no doubt. But you can't only have that. We're not going to achieve this without fostering the leaders and the space within these organizations to understand that some of these things are not linear. We will learn a lot as we go. We need to foster cultures that are not afraid to fail fast, encourage our teams to share what have they learned from that. Okay, get back up. What are we going to do again? So leadership behaviors and incentives play a really big role in that as a cultural shift. And the other thing I would say is I think we need to not be siloed across the disciplines. So we have a wonderful wealth of knowledge in the sustainability and social disciplines now, but those people also need to be able to think commercially and to be able to engage with and develop commercial models within the business. Likewise, leaders who maybe thought of themselves as purely commercial, I don't think can just be purely commercial anymore. They need to understand the broader external context and these really rapid transitions that we're undergoing. So those would probably be my two.
I wholeheartedly agree and would build on her last one. I think we need leaders who are able to speak to, collaborate, understand players across business, policy, civil society, and across different types of businesses as well. And that ability to move between spheres of influence and spheres of power is, I think, rare and really, really useful leadership skill at this stage. And the one I would add is that true leadership is not just about navigating what's coming, it's about shaping what's coming. And so we need leaders who have the courage to set a vision and stay true to it, acknowledging that the path to that vision will have to be adapted 1,000 times along the way. But staying true to the vision is really a sign of leadership and being proactive in shaping that vision forwards, not just for one organization, but for the system in which the organization operates.
It's one of the key messages of our work at CISL. This is about not just adapting and navigating to complexity. It's about working to shape a future in the context, of course, of disruption and complexity. Thank you so much for joining us today, Katie and Faustine. We've heard, and I think I have taken some inspiration from this, that although we're not yet seeing the pace of change we need, there's also insufficient recognition of the real momentum that does exist, that is happening. There's a huge range of innovation already scaling and a huge range of technologies that are primed and ready to be scaled if we can just get the conditions right. That we need to be realistic. We are going to need material commodity inputs, the technologies, the infrastructure of the future. We may get to a future state when we're fully circular, but that's not where we are now. And pragmatically, we are going to need to find smart and efficient ways to get those inputs into the economy and the industries of the future. Some really valuable lessons learned about what it takes to scale, and a really important point about policy certainty, but also the enabling context to be able to innovate, that it isn't just about defending the status quo, but creating that enabling context for some really bold innovation and experimentation that is going to be necessary. Thank you so much for your time and sharing those insights. Join us next time for What Next?
This show is presented by Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive of CISL, and Marc Kahn, Investec's Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer. The producers are Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and Alexa Selwood. The executive producer is Gillian Secret, and it's produced in partnership with Investec. Thank you for listening. For more episodes, subscribe on any major podcast platform or visit the Leadership Hub on the CISL website or Investec Focus. You'll find the address in the show notes.